And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather that'll take us through the Thanksgiving Day holiday. Now, this Wednesday, we're still watching an area of low pressure that's going to be lifting up toward the eastern Aleutians out of the North Pacific, and then this frontal boundary that's going to be pushing northward up and then lie along the Gulf Coast as we get into Thanksgiving. And as a result, we have widespread IFR conditions from the northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White Passes down across Yakutat Bay into the lower Copper River Basin, Wrangell, St. Elias Mountains along the eastern Kenai, up along especially the southern slopes of the Alaska Range, and then further out toward the west, some intrusion up into the southwest interior, and then down along the Yukon, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay coastline. As we go through Thursday afternoon, we find that front just kind of hung up here. It may push a little farther inland. Precipitation associated with this system is going to be on the light side, but unfortunately it is going to bring icing potential because we have just a southeast to south flow of air, moist, slightly milder air that'll lend toward a mix of precipitation, some coastal rains, mountain snows, and then in between areas that could see a little bit of light freezing rain or light rain, especially parts of the Anchorage Bowl. And so that's going to be a concern as well. Farther north, too, we could see an area of IFR developing along and north of the middle upper Yukon River up into the Yukon Flats by Thursday, Thanksgiving Day afternoon. And then widespread IFR conditions across the Gulf Coast, especially northern western Gulf, including Prince William Sound, and again, especially along the south side of the Alaska Range into the Copper River Basin, and then also an area of IFR along the Alcan border. They're just toward the east side of the Yukon Flats, and then again from the Bering Strait down through St. Lawrence along the Yukon Delta into Kuskokwim Bay, and then out over much of the central Bering and eastern Aleutians. For Friday afternoon, a continuation with this trough that's just going to kind of lie across the region here in south central. IFR conditions along the northern, northeastern Gulf Coast, and especially the south slope of the Alaska Range, including the Susitna Valley, Talkeetna Mountains, and then areas back out toward from St. Lawrence, south of the Bering Strait to just off the Yukon Delta into areas of the southwest, and then back out across much of the central eastern Bering down into the eastern Aleutians. So past conditions on Thursday, Anaktuvik Pass VFR, Adigan Pass VFR conditions. We still have kind of a ridge of high pressure holding in place through that area, allowing for a little better conditions. Now back down toward the south, as I mentioned, especially the south and east side of the Alaska Range, we're looking at IFR conditions, Lake Clark and Merrill. Also Rainy Pass, on up through Windy Pass, in through Isabel Pass. We all expect IFR conditions there along the south and eastward facing slopes. And then further east, Mentasta Pass should generally be able to stay VFR during the day on Thursday. Further south and west, Tanita Pass, sandwiched between some IFR and VFR. And then Portage Pass, we'll see IFR conditions, especially the eastern half on up into Prince William Sound in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. And farther east up in the northern corner there of the Panhandle, we're looking at Chilkoot and White remaining IFR on Thanksgiving Thursday. So Thursday morning, freezing levels, surface freezing line runs down along the southwest coast, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, and then up into areas of Cook Inlet and east side of the Kenai, and then along the northern Gulf Coast into the inner channels, inner coastal mountains there of the Panhandle. And then freezing levels aloft do bump up above 2,000 to around 4,000 feet along the northern Gulf Coast, to as high as 6,000 feet and above once you get out into the open waters of the Gulf there southeastward. Greatest threat for icing on Thursday. It's going to be kind of patchy, but moderate icing possible in southern parts of the Panhandle, areas along the northern and northwestern Gulf, along the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. We have an area up in the northern Cook Inlet, extending up into the lower Matsu Valley and up the Susitna Valley, and then back out here toward areas of Bristol Bay, and then especially out here beneath the actual cool pool of air, low center out here in the lower Bering, above 3,000 and 4,000 feet in through the central Aleutians. Upper level winds at 30,000 feet. We have a core of winds in excess of 90 to 105 knots approaching the Gulf southwesterly, and that'll just continue to be the case. We have the low circulation like this, and then behind me we have winds that are kind of coming in back down along out of the north there once you get out toward the southwest of the Aleutians at 700 millibars. You can see just a broad belt of southwest to westerly winds coming up out of the North Pacific across the Gulf, southeast Alaska, northern Panhandle, and then into northwest Canada. And within this area, generally 40 knot winds, but we have areas where winds are 50, even as high as 60, 70 knots there off the Kenai and Kodiak Island, further south into the North Pacific. There's the low circulation at 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, and then at 3,000 feet, low is largely vertically stacked. It's occluded, and so it's just sitting here in this area of the eastern Aleutians. Ahead of it, we do find some winds at 3,000 feet, 40 to as high as 60 knots. They're just off toward the east of Kodiak, and areas, pockets of 50 knot plus winds extending down into the North Pacific, and then a broad area of 50 plus 50, 55 knot winds along areas of the western Aleutians. So as a result, we expect some widespread moderate turbulence along areas of the Gulf here, northern Panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast near Yakutat Bay. And also out here along areas, the entrance of Cook Inlet, there could even be some isolated severe turbulence just off of Kodiak Island in this area. Back out toward Bristol Bay, and then out along the Alaska Peninsula, as well as out here throughout much of the Aleutians. There could be some isolated severe turbulence, especially in the western Aleutians, generally surface to 4,000 feet, little higher, surface to 6,000 feet here as you get around the higher terrain here in areas surrounding Cook Inlet, and then a little area of isolated moderate turbulence possible there in the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea, mainly just to the north there of Dead Horse, surface to 3,000 feet.